If we could go to the next slide, please. So today's webinar, very, very important conversation, designing effortless customer experiences where conversational AI and DIY meet. First of all, let me introduce myself. For you that do not know me, my name is Chad McDaniel. I am the president and founder of Execs in the Know, is a corporate sharing community of CX peers and leaders. I'll get more into that in a minute here. But what I'd like to do is share a little, just sort of level set on a couple things here just to make sure we're clear on acronyms and a few other things. DIY is do it yourself. I'm sure everyone knows that, but I'm just going to put it on there for the recording. And then conversational AI, when I think of what is conversational AI, I think it's like referring to the use of messaging apps, speech-based assistants, chatbots to automate communication and create personalized customer experiences at scale. Very, very relevant, very, very important to the world we live as service leaders in our organization. So welcome to today's webinar. I've got some great guests, some great content. Sit back, relax. We're going to have a great discussion. Please move to the next slide. With that, just a quick housekeeping for all our guests. This presentation will be made available. You'll get an email link tomorrow with all of the slides and the recording. Today, right after we end the session, you're going to get a quick Q&A survey from today's session. I would really appreciate it if you take a couple of minutes and just share your feedback. I really look at that feedback, I value it, and it helps us set the stage, so to speak, as we continue in the webinar series at Execs in the Know. So everything will be provided to you, and it'll be there tomorrow. The survey will happen today. If we could go quickly next. Execs in the Know, for you that are not aware of us, I'm a little bit on cloud nine. Last week, we were in Denver. We hosted our National Leadership Summit, and we had like 150 brands there. It was a great two-day powwow, and I'm really armed with the latest and greatest, I think, kind of what's on top of mind, what's taking place within service resolution for customer experience leaders. And I really want to try to help advocate some of the learnings and sharings that we just picked up last week in Denver. The also thing, Execs in the Know is a corporate end-user community, and for our corporate brands that are listening today, I highly encourage you to get involved. We're an insights sharing group. We're not an association. We're not a paid-for membership. It is a very, very large group of customer leaders sharing best practices, insights in a very unfiltered way. You can go to execsintheknow.com. There are so many people in the community that are willing to share their stories. There's lessons learned. I would highly encourage you to get involved. If we could go to next, please. One thing I will note is that for those that are listening, actually, I'm going to be in New York. We partnered with SiriusXM October 22nd. For any of our listeners in the area there, we have an all-day briefing about automation, conversational AI, everything around next-gen type of technologies. It's a full-day briefing. I'd love you to come join us. We're going to have a great partnership with SiriusXM and what we're going to be doing for the local members there. Also, I'm going to be in Microsoft Seattle in December 4th. For the people in that area, we're doing a full-day gig economy briefing. We had some great conversation last week in Denver at the summit about gig economy and the panels and the other things there. Just a lot to talk about, so please join us. And finally, we partnered with the University of Phoenix. We're going to be November 6th, a lunch and learn. It's from like 11 to 1:30. University of Phoenix is going to provide a mini case study, and then we partnered with Home Depot in Atlanta November 14th. So for our listeners, lots of ways to get involved in our face-to-face regional engagements and the things that we're doing. If you could go to the next slide. And the last thing I'll say is our online community. One way that we keep the conversation going in a very persistent way for our corporate brands, and I'm sending this directly to the corporate listeners, Our online community is a persistent, ongoing way to share in conversations when we're not together in live events. It's a way to reach out to people directly in the community and ask questions that are top of mind. Lots of ways to get involved. So let's go on to the next slide, if we may. First of all, Rachel and Eduardo, are you, I just want to say welcome, are you there? I just want to make sure we got good sound.
Good.
Hi, Rachel. Eduardo?
I'm here. Oh, glad to be here.
Okay, I hear you now. So for all our guests today, again, it's a very important topic at mine here. Rachel, I know you're in Seattle, and thank you very much for participating with us today. Execs in the know asked our partners at Nuance to participate in this to help share in the learning and the advancement of the industry, and I greatly appreciate it. Eduardo, you're in Phoenix like me, so it was a long, hot summer, but we're past it now, I'm hoping. But I hope everyone had a great summer and welcome. So first of all, Rachel, Eduardo, thank you so much for your time. Maybe what we could do before we get started, just a quick introduction, a little bit about what your role is, and let's set the stage for our listeners. Rachel, we'll start with you.
Okay, terrific. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This is Rachel speaking, and I am very happy to be here. And I look after product marketing for tools and technologies at Nuance. Eduardo?
Yes, my name is Eduardo Olvera. I'm Director of Conversational Experience and User Experience Design at Nuance. I'm part of also the Technology Advancement Group within our company, working with our most innovative teams.
Well, welcome to both of you. And one of the things I'd asked is sort of, we're getting into the presentation right now, is maybe some of the key takeaways that we're thinking of conversational design or conversational AI. And I know both of you shared with me a lot about the interconnected experiences, some of the tools and technologies that we're seeing taking place, maybe even the technology to leverage the right tools, but some of the advanced speech technologies and APIs, and basically sharing a balanced position to the DIY do-it-yourself model. So with that, I've got some questions. I'm sure listeners have some questions. Let's get into the learning, and I'll let you folks take it away. Can we go next? So Rachel, Eduardo, can you see the slides here?
Yep. Eduardo is going to kick this off for us.
Okay,
let's go.
Yeah. So of course, I guess the first question would be, why are we here? And I think if you think about your daily, I don't think a day goes by where we don't read about either a scandal related to a customer expectation not being met in social media, or just keep hearing these buzzwords like artificial intelligence, conversational experiences, and we're really trying to understand what do they really mean to us? How do they affect us? And it just seems like doing business is just getting more and more complicated each day with the smaller coming in and the our markets, definitely with no rest in sight. So these are all the market forces that we are seeing are coming in, are getting combined right now, and causing these struggle within our companies to figure out what do we need to do next. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit more about just the customer experience and care. If you think about it, in the past, companies were pretty happy customers going to their stores. So you had this really personal communication, interaction with your customers, physically purchasing things, goods and services, maybe with some support via the phone, which just added some convenience. But then things changed. As you can see in the next slide, as the time went by, all these communication mechanisms evolved. And you had these companies that were starting to look for opportunities to reach these customers. And of course, at the same time, save some costs. So we had companies that are started off things like people adding now email, communicate with them. We saw, of course, an implementation of the web with websites and mobile applications. We're starting seeing some action in social media and chatbots and chat channels. Then we also started to see some presence physically, via store, via kiosks, via smart displays. And now kind of the latest wave has been with the smart speakers and Internet of Things and all these smart devices. And I think the turning point is that all these customers now, they are really comfortable with all these channels. Challenge is that in return, they expect to access one single interface system. That's the challenge companies are facing today. That's the dilemma. How do you deliver on those expectations of single communication? Next slide, please. What do you think, Rachel?
Well, certainly what you just showed, the customer engagement possibilities in the landscape has evolved considerably, which in a lot of cases for us is really exciting. But as you said, it brings a lot of complexity too for companies that are serving us. Part of that complexity is how do companies now adapt to these changing expectations swiftly and more efficiently. Next slide. In part, what we're seeing is companies are looking to shift more of the work in-house and do more themselves in designing these solutions and creating these solutions that Eduardo just talked about. This shift, has been happening over time here. It's really a combination of some market forces, lower barrier to entry with the cloud and APIs and open source providing greater access alongside the growing popularity and availability of DIY tools. And then also across the market, a lot of the Fortune 500 companies are really considering, these market changes and exploring more. How do they do more of the work themselves, either in building out teams or existing teams, empowering their existing teams so they can achieve those faster turnaround times by not waiting on a vendor and also reap some of the cost savings of doing more themselves. So this is some of the trends that we're seeing. Next slide. And so if you combine these market shifts and the shift in what the enterprises are looking for, you also have these developments in zero code development platforms and API access and AI, and you have what we're calling kind of this perfect storm brewing for DIY. And if you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that if you wanted to build an application on your own, you needed a software engineer to do it. But now with the growing availability of drag and drop development, we're seeing a rising tide for business users and, less technical individuals being able to do some of the work themselves without any specialized, coding requirements. Also, you have APIs. APIs are certainly nothing new. They've been used in computing for some time now, but because of the rise in voice-enabled applications and Alexa-style expectations, there's more out there for these types of cognitive resources. Some certainly better than others. There's been a lot of jumping on the bandwagon, but in essence, this demand for APIs for speech recognition and natural language understanding has driven a lot of new exploration in this type of tech. And, every company really is becoming sort of a quote unquote technology company with 89% of companies increasing or maintaining their tech spend in 2019. And then finally, AI, the advancements in AI, you can go back. The advancements in AI to make customer engagement more accurate, more predictive, more personalized, or to learn on its own are also improving the customer experience and providing the opportunity to address more of that interconnected experience that Eduardo was just talking about. Now you can go to the next slide. So, what we're seeing is this perfect storm is expanding rapidly what businesses can do and also what they're looking for. So, in the case of the companies that we work with, it's a really exciting time because they have, first and foremost, better access to, some really high quality and cutting edge technology, better self-service tools, but they also need access to the expertise. Also flexibility. So there are a lot of choices to deploy solutions and also at the same time, there's considerations for each of those. Whether you're thinking about hosted or on-premise or third-party clouds or integrating with other systems and vendors. And then, finally, organizations are looking for more autonomy and control. So companies that are looking at DIY approaches can now get, this is going to enable them to get more visibility into the process of doing this, also the ability to do more themselves while still collaborating for the skills that they may not have, sort of giving them the best of both worlds. Next slide. And all of these factors and the customer needs make this buy versus build decision more complex. Because as tempting as it is with these advancements and the choices available and the ease of access, the buy versus build decision doesn't always consider the complexity and expertise that's required to effectively design these conversations. And Eduardo is going to talk about this in a minute, but before he does, you might say, well, we don't need a complex solution. We just need a simple chat bot. We've got that covered. Next slide. But this slide's pretty telling, how well companies do or don't serve these complex scenarios or engage customers the way they want to be engaged is critical. This statistic here, it's sobering, but worthwhile to consider that over the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. They're gone. They didn't adapt. And even brands that we all thought were untouchable have suffered greatly from reactivity. So take Sears. Sears, really a long time ago, became a retailing juggernaut through innovation. Everything from inventing mail order catalogs to serve their customers, to creating installment loans, which sort of made them the go-to place for cash-strapped consumers. And at one point, Sears was the most innovative retailer of all time until the internet came along, and Sears leadership simply ignored internet retailing and figured its old success formula would, last forever. But clearly they were wrong. So, we see these Sears type scenarios sadly all too often. So, what we're going to talk about next is how do we make sure we're adapting to meet the needs of consumers and not become the next Sears. So, Eduardo, do you want to take over from here?
And related to what Rachel was, I think also one of the hard aspects about this, that creating conversations and conversation experiences, it feels very natural, right? How hard could it really be? We do this every day. We're having conversations. We're having one right now. So that's really the question. Next one, please. Here's a quote that I always and it's this idea that the fact that we converse not automatically make us good at designing conversational interactions. Why? Because what happens is underneath the words that we're using, there's a whole set of additional considerations that may not be obvious at first glance. So things like psychological principles, linguistic elements, and sometimes even nonverbal elements of communication, which we've taken thousands of years to develop, that are part of our communications, the way we do it every day, that are often not perceived or often not considered. Next slide, please. And as part of that, one of the trends is that this term, conversational design or conversational experiences, feels extremely overloaded. It's almost like artificial intelligence. If you ask 5 people in the room, each one gives you a very different definition. So just to get started, I would like to kind of set the stage and define how it is that we define conversational design so we are all the same level. And the way we really see this is this process, an interactive process of working with customers to create experiences that are human-centric, social, that are interactive, that are grounded in these communication principles developed over thousands of years, regardless of the mode of interaction. So that's really key here. I'm not thinking about how to create the next best experience or how to turn my phone experience into an Alexa one. I'm looking at that. I'm really trying to understand, if you think about going back to those early days of the one-to-one communication, how can I take all those elements that made communication so successful between two people and try to make that into an automated system so that people feel that they still have this personal touch every time they interact with us, every time they're communicating with us. And also to address that problem that I mentioned of how do you handle conversations these days as they are spread around multiple channels. Next slide. And here's a typical example. We often get customers that ask us, okay, how can I create the next Alexa, the next Google Home experience for my system? And once we sit down with them and we start talking about devices, start kind of going a little deeper, they finally realized that the things that we're talking about and what they need are actually very different. Think about the pervasiveness of speech these days, right? In cars, we have in smart speakers, in doorbells, we have light bulbs, glass. I think even so in toilets. You can tell your toilet to flush for you just using your voice. The question is, are these experiences a good fit? Let's think about this for a second. When I have a device at my home, I'm probably going to do something that is not really transactional in nature. It's probably going to be something very broad. Maybe I want to get some weather. I then switch it and start playing some music. Maybe tell me a joke. So it goes all across the board. But it's very shallow. I don't really need to do a lot of stuff with this thing, and I don't really need a lot of information. Very often, they are single interactions. I say something, the device does something for me. And very often, too, the nature of these interactions tends to be about entertainment. Again, playing music, playing a movie, hitting the weather, playing a game. It's very entertainment. And then also, because of that, it has a very low consequence. If something goes wrong, I can just repeat it again. And then hopefully we'll get it right this time. When we talk, it's really the idea of a voice application, which, as you can imagine now, it's very different. Very often, very narrow domain. For example, if we're talking to a bank, it's going to be a banking implement. So it's very specialized and it's very branded oriented, and also goes pretty deep. It has a business process. It has to be well integrated with the backends, and very often too requires multiple interactions, multiple steps. Like you can see in here, just a simple interaction of maybe just buying some tickets might require multiple turns. Really, it's almost like a negotiation that you have between the user and the system. It also has transactional value, which from the other system. You're trying to do something for the customer wants to buy something from you, and therefore also has a high consequence if something were to go wrong. Next slide, please. So now that we understand the differences between what kind of exposed to these days and what real speech solutions look like, the next question that I often get is, where's the value? So who's going to be getting the value of this interaction? Is this something that needs to be distributed between the business or the customers? And what are the trade-offs? So that's what I wanted to share with you, some examples of companies that have really embraced this idea of conversational experiences at heart, that have really discovered that these types of experiences across different channels are one of those things that truly delivers a win-win scenario because it provides value on both sides of the conversation. So let's look at the business side first. For example, we were working with a financial services company, and they were able to achieve almost a 5% containment improvement that represented almost $5 million a year in savings. And that was just by better interactions that allowed customers to serve without having to escalate or talk to a customer service agent. Then we also talked to a retailer, and the way they took conversation was a little bit different. So rather than enhancing the conversation they were having with customers on real time, they built a prediction model using all the customer data they had. And just by using that, about 45% of being able to, somebody reaches out to them, regardless of the channel, to predict what's the reason why they are reaching out to me. So that for them really meant increasing content, generating almost $1 million in savings. We're also working with airlines, and in airlines, not a prediction, but what we're trying to do was to think about proactive notifications. What has happened up to this point that might trigger you to be reconnecting with me again? Maybe you called me and you asked me for flight information 10 minutes ago. And of course, if your flight was delayed, chances are you're going to be calling back pretty soon to ask me about the same. So how can I proactively do that without you having to do much work? By doing that, they saved about $3 million with almost a 5% containment year to date. And also the uptime rate dropped from 37% to 9.8%. We also have cases, for example, with telecommunications, that they saw almost a 20% containment improvement over engagement lifetime. And this is also one of the key aspects. That often with this technology, this is not something that you design once, deploy once, and then let it go, and you're done. These things have to grow over time. They have to have organic growth. You have to constantly be monitoring, constantly be optimizing them and analyzing for new opportunities that are available to you. So for them, over the cycle that they've been going through, I think they've accumulated almost $200 million in savings over the lifespan of the project. And finally, this is another company, an insurance. And what they did is that they worked really hard. Again, those were the ones that understood that once they roll out a chatbot or assistant, they realized that it was not one thing, you were done. They're really invested in finding new opportunities with the chatbot, new ways to automate communications. And they right now divert about 2 million calls per month into digital channels. So it's not me trying to talk to them and them redirecting me. It's me by choice deciding to use digital and self-service just because it delivers a best experience based on the context and interaction that I have with them. Next slide, please. And let's look at the other side. What about the users? What we're trying to do is make their lives better. And of course, people vote with the wallets. So some of the things that we see that happen when you create experiences that are very conversational and feel very natural is that things tend to be very easy to use. You don't have to learn how to use them. And that, of course, means that then you can increase the task success. People are more successful at doing whatever it is they're trying to do or they're with. It also increases engagement because it's so natural, it's personalized, it just feels like something that they can really work with. And of course, it also feels very, very something that they own is very personal for them, which also means that they can adopt it better and they have repeat usage because the better it gets, so they always come back. It's that idea of retention. Also, it comes with a right? We increase customer satisfaction. And by doing that, we also increase the trust we have in our brand and the loyalty they reflect to us. Another way we measure the recommendations and the referrals that they have with them. If they talk to others, if they talk in social media about us and the experiences, that's what we're looking for, that net promoters. Next slide, please. So the question is this just based on voice itself? Like, does voice give me all these attributes just by attributing voice? Or are there specific strategies that you can use for designing these types of conversations? Next slide, please. So how do you start? What are some of the design principles and strategies that you can use? And in here, what you're going to see is that over the course of our conversation, it's three things that we're looking at. We're looking at the design, we're looking at tools and technology, and looking at people. So first, I want to talk about design. This is where we talk about some of those strategies and principles. And in particular, what I want is to help you switch your way of thinking, because very often companies start thinking about products and technologies first and how to use them and the problems that they hopefully solve. So what we want to do is actually reverse the way of thinking and start from the problem, from the thing you're trying to solve or the goal you're trying to enable. Next slide, please. So as with all user-centric design, we have two goals. The first one is we're trying to shift the users to the system wherever possible. We know complexity is going to be there, always, because businesses are complex. The question is, who's going to be fronting complexity? Are you going to take it up from the and find ways to automate it and streamline it behind the scenes? You're just going to push it out to them and then have them being the ones that have to deal with the complexity. And as part of that too, the natural goal of that is we're trying to minimize the number of instructions they need and also all the things they have to remember and they have to memorize in order to complete something. So trying to maximize efficiency and performance of that interaction. Next slide, please. So now that we have a clear goal in mind, we're trying to solve, that's when we can bring to the table the idea of, so you can think of them almost as filters that is going to allow you to look at this problem from a very different perspective and then start to come up with a myriad of possible solutions for those problems and goals. Next slide. A sample of the catalog of possible design strategies that you apply when you're creating these interactions. So you can think, for example, about cooperation. How are you going to minimize your user effort? Goal orientation, context awareness. That's one of my favorites. Is this ability of responding and behaving appropriately based on that you know about them, on maybe what happened in the previous conversation, but also anything that has happened in the past as I was interacting with them, and also maybe about the future, if I can start predicting some of these interactions. So as you can see, a very focused approach when you're designing your conversation on the strategy, try to find opportunities. It's about speed and clarity, better ways to have interactions that feel more natural, setting the right expectations through honesty, trying to anticipate these needs, being cautious with people's time, and also especially with error tolerance, because we know that things are going to go south at some point. So being able to anticipate those errors and shift and recover seamlessly, that's one of the key aspects also in terms of strategies. And then on the final step, this idea of combining them. If I have now this goal in mind and I'm looking into this filter, now I can start to think about what do I need? What combination of product and technologies and services do I need to be able to enable solutions that are going to allow me to solve those problems and those situations? Rachel?
Okay. So now you might be asking yourself, where do you go from here? As we, talked about in the beginning of the webinar today, there certainly isn't any dearth in the available products and technologies and services out there to leverage. This, certainly makes the DIY approach appealing, and for good reason, because there are a lot of benefits. But I wonder if this next slide triggers any memories for you. Um, this is awful to look at. It wasn't that long ago, and we still see it somewhat today that, organizations thought when the web first started that, hey, this is easy. Let's create a website, use our internal teams and tools like Wix or, Squarespace to get this done. And we saw a lot of undesirable outcomes with those approaches. Now of course the tools and expertise to do this have grown exponentially since the advent of the web, but there are many examples of this. If you think about anything DIY today, um, going to Home Depot and getting a hammer doesn't make you an architect, or having a cookbook and a spatula, does not make you a chef, certainly not for me anyway. And, we're seeing a similar trend here with organizations that want to build virtual assistants, for example, very popular DIY use case. So, the question is, how do you take advantage of DIY effectively to achieve that faster path while still achieving the kind of quality that you need? So we certainly don't want to be doom and gloom here. We're seeing a lot of creative applications of this, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But DIY is definitely achievable with the right combination of tools, technologies, and expertise. So leveraging the technology and tools that are available to bring or build your own expertise, while reinforcing this approach with experienced partners and the types of skills that Eduardo just talked about that are critical to creating effective conversational experiences. Next slide. So API, so starting with leveraging the technology itself, let's start there. APIs definitely play an important role because they provide a lot of benefits in terms of fast access to technology that you don't have the skills or resources to build in-house. Flexibility, to pick and choose only what you need. And then also software as a service models, instead of packaged solution models. Next slide. The benefit here of APIs isn't necessarily specific to our industry. You're certainly seeing APIs being used across all types of solution development, but we call them out here because, as I mentioned earlier in our talk today, there's been definitely an uptick, in the demand for these advanced speech technologies, and businesses are needing to adjust and act fast, as Eduardo mentioned, to kind of keep up. And so we're seeing increased interest from our customers in looking at how they can take more advantage of that flexibility and speed and access that APIs afford. And you can see some of the benefits listed here. And I really like to think about, quality, flexibility, and speed. So quality is always going to take center stage, and the types of advanced conversational capabilities we're talking about aren't typically our customers' core business. So using APIs for easier access and to be able to kind of pick and choose the highest quality, cutting edge AI and natural language technologies for whatever use cases you have is a big benefit here. And the use cases are truly endless. We're seeing a lot of creative applications of the tech. So the flexibility, that second piece that APIs offer, and the speed, and how easily you can integrate and deploy them is really attractive to our customers today. And then just, on a final note here, with technology that's advancing at the speed that it's advancing today, using an API that is connecting you to the most up-to-date technology is also a very important differentiator here as well. Next slide. But, and I hesitate to say there is a but access to the technology is only part of the puzzle. The availability and accessibility of these technologies is great, but it's really what you do with them and how you do it that's the tricky part. Eduardo showed you earlier the difference between simple Q&A and conversational dialogue. And getting to that end state of conversational dialogue involves the types of technologies that you see here on the left, definitely important, but they represent only a fraction of the overall effort. That other 85%, the user experience design and speech and data science, the expertise and the tools to build a dialogue that delivers a quality user experience that is enterprise grade, requires specialized skills, the types of things that you see reflected here, and the tools as well, necessary, that are necessary to support those skills in designing and developing and testing and optimizing the dialogue. So this is the piece where everything can get complex. Next slide. So when we think about how we support DIY for customers, we ask, do you have the specialized skills? Are you building them? Or do you need to work with an experienced partner to get there? So thinking about how to effectively DIY, you might consider more of a our skills, your skills approach, where you're leveraging best of breed technologies and agile common tools, and I'll talk more about the tools in a minute, while collaborating for those highly specialized skills that you don't have or you don't plan to develop in your business. So one piece of this approach isn't more important than the other. They all need to be present, the technologies, the specialized skills, as well as the common tools. Next slide. So we've talked about the technologies and the specialized skills. What about the tools? Certainly, like the tech, there isn't any shortage of tools and platforms out there. The question here is more about the process. So, what process should the tools enable for DIY, and does your platform provide these components across the process for design, development, testing, and optimization? So first, it's really looking for tools that enable this full life cycle support, but also tools that are going to give you the base to stand on and get started, but they also should improve the quality and efficiency of what you're doing. And what I mean by that is showing you what you need to learn and enabling you to learn from what others are doing, whether it's through built-in sample applications or pre-built design models and tutorials that will help those less specialized users learn how to think like an expert. And these kinds of best practices, they take time to develop, and they should be built in to any tools you're considering for your teams. Also, automation and reuse. So we talked earlier about zero code platforms, making it easier to DIY, but it's more than that. You should expect a level of automation that's built in to cut down on one of the most laborious parts of the innovation cycle, and that's testing and reuse across channels. So Eduardo talked about the numerous channels. So that certainly is a challenge, but things like also automated testing, for faster quality assurance. We're talking about enterprise grade applications. And so, that testing component is critical. And also, sharing that design and code across channels as much as you can, as we all are looking at these numerous channels that we need to support. And then finally, related to that, businesses really need to consider the ongoing optimization, and continuous improvement. It's definitely not a set it and forget it. So you see here that, reporting and analytics are key components that you want to include to identify those opportunities for improvement. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that the use cases are endless, and they truly are. And this is just a sampling of the ways that some of our customers are using the individual technology components, and then pairing them with good design practices, the ones that Eduardo covered, to come up with really innovative solutions, that create new forms of value for their customers. Next slide. Actually, that's the previous one. Thank you. So I'll start to wrap here simply by saying that we've talked a lot about all the different capabilities, and it's a lot to absorb. But kind of our vision is that we believe that DIY is best when it's partnered with expertise, and that our customers are active participants that can benefit from that expertise. So our tools and technologies, can provide any level of DIY that you wish, and we're always here to provide the right level of skills that you need to deliver great customer experience and the business outcomes that would be unique to your organization. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach here, and I hope we can demonstrate that. And then in the next slide, sort of recapping the steps that we would recommend. First, identify the problem and goal and disruptive objectives so you can line up the relevant design strategies to address those objectives. Second, developing the right skills in-house and reinforcing with experienced partners where necessary. And then finally, step 3, consider your buy and build decision very carefully, and then get started. Experiment, learn, and iterate. There's lots of opportunity there, and we appreciate your time. And I think I'll turn it back over to Chad. I think you're going to share some closing comments and Q&A.
Yes, thank you. And I've been feverishly taking notes and learning as we've been going through the discussion here, and so many thoughts go through my mind. And I appreciate, first of all, Rachel and Eduardo, you did a fantastic job of kind of opening up our thinking and looking at things from a different perspective. Everyone that knows me within the Execs and Know community, I like to ask questions, and I'm going to throw it to the audience here, and I've got a couple things I want to bring up and get some questions, but I really would love to hear from you, audience, what you think of DIY. Have you tried things? What's worked? What hasn't worked? What are pitfalls? Is there anything you can share with us in the learning of this? Because that's really what the community is about. It's self-teach, helping each other out. So you can go to the comment section. You can go to the chat, question, answer. Drop me a couple of notes there. I'd love to hear what questions you may have in regards to what we've talked about and just the DIY approach itself and your general sentiment towards that. If we could just go back to the previous slide, I'll leave that up there for reference for the moment. One thing I do want to make our listeners aware of is that twice a year we release our corporate findings and consumer findings report. In Denver, we just released our consumer edition, and I'd like to offer up to all of the attendees here, we'll include a link which is just to the automation section of that report. The overall report is about 80 pages. It's fantastic findings, but in the specific, what I would call the automation section of that report, it would be about 4 pages, and we'll make sure we'll include that in today's session. It was interesting to hear from the consumers that we surveyed for that report how they're perceiving all the things that we've been talking about. There's some really good data charts and some findings in that report, so I offer that up. Please look at it. You can also email me, chad@execsintheknow.com, and I'd be happy to get that PDF over to you also. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start out just this way, Rachel or Eduardo. What is kind of the key findings or concerns, maybe things that can trip people up? I know there's many pieces to that, but I mean, what would be, you've given a good roadmap of all this stuff here, but would there be something else that you really would just want to caution, throw a flag in the field, or just be very reiterative on today's session, what we've talked about, if I'm a brand thinking about this?
Sure, I can go first. I think one of the big ones that also comes across very often is this idea of something once and reusable in a reusable way and just deploy it many times. And I feel like customers really expect to be able to achieve this by using kind of whatever channel is easier for them, and then just kind of jumping and have into others. So that's where we make this distinction between what people call multi-channel, basically meaning I can offer the same functionality across multiple channels, versus the true idea of omni-channel, which is the ability of me to have a conversation with a company that is seamless across different channels. So regardless of which channel I pick, if I go from one to the other, the conversation somehow continues, and you are aware of what's happened so far, and I'm also aware of what's been happening on my end. So really, in order to achieve that, what we found is the idea of designing once and just deploying it as is requires a little bit of finesse and a little bit of tweaking. So it's really more this idea of businesses understanding the requirements and defining them once, because definitely those are very reusable, right? If I'm making a payment, if I'm purchasing something, it's probably going to be the same regardless of whether I talk to you, whether I'm using live chat, whether I'm using a chatbot, or whether I'm using a mobile application. So the process is probably going to be the same. But the trick here is that when you're designing the solution, you have to really think about the specific channel that you're trying to target, because the right experience is really going to be based on the context, and each is going to present different strengths and weaknesses. So you really have to think about what's going to be the next step once I get this request, or if I'm in the middle of this process. Can this channel serve it correctly? Do I need to send them somewhere else? Do I need to use multiple channels to deliver that particular question or answer, or being able to accomplish the task? And then definitely deploy it across all these different channels and continuously monitoring to optimize on there.
Thank you, Eduardo, for that. Good statement. Rachel, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, actually, I was going to tag on to what Eduardo was saying. I mean, I think that he's really pointing out a really important factor for businesses today, and the it's sort of the multi-channel kind of landscape that we live in. And I think a great, just kind of bringing it back to sort of the DIY topic is I think a great way to start in DIY is in that kind of update and maintenance mode with your application. So, bringing some of maybe, partnering with somebody to on, kind of the important elements of conversational design and some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, and starting slowly with, making updates to your applications and learning how to do that, and and make those tweaks and updates that are critical, and then learning more about how you optimize your applications based upon what you're learning through that process. So if you don't have the right resources, and let's be honest, a lot of us aren't going to have those resources in-house. They aren't core skills to the businesses that we work with, whether it's a financial services company or telecommunications. In a lot of cases, these are not the core business. So, working with a partner for those pieces and ensuring that you have that upfront design, really locked down, and then working with them as well on looking at sort of how people are using your system and then optimizing it accordingly. So I think that's a decent use case for starting small and growing as you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you go to the previous slide to the one about collaborating with an expert? And Paul, your question, yes, everyone will get a copy of the slides tomorrow. You'll get a link with recording in the slides. I do encourage you to share this within your network or your peer group there. Paul, you had asked basically, I don't know if it's this particular slide, but you said, can you go back over how to use external resources? So Rachel, Eduardo, Paul is asking, how to use external resources. I don't know if there's just something particular you just comes to mind, but I want to answer that. Larry, I see your question. I'll get to the rest, but any quick thought on Paul's comment quickly?
Well, I mean, the way I see this, and for our company here at Nuance, we want to offer, we think this collaboration is kind of the sweet spot, right? So we have the capabilities for our customers to do more themselves. We have APIs for all of our core services, as you see here, and tooling and training. As well, on the other end of the spectrum, we work with lots of customers that have valued our expertise because we've been in this business for 20 plus years, right? So in that case, we have tremendous expertise. We've got a global team. We're focused on the enterprise, and this is our core business. But right there in the middle, we want to meet our customers where they're at. So we want to collaboratively work together, leverage your expertise, our expertise, and support our customers in that way. So it's really using external resources like Nuance. We can offer those different options.
And if anyone's listening today, I mean, I'm happy to get you in touch with Rachel, Eduardo, or whoever if you'd like to get more information about Nuance and some of the things we've been discussing. Rachel, this question was for you from Larry. And Larry's question was, have you seen any trends where companies start with DIY or DIY with simple chatbots, virtual assistants, then natural language processing, NLU, or some other sequence? So do you need me to repeat that, or did you kind of get the text of it?
No, I think I got the question. I think if you look at it, I think it's the previous slide, yes, definitely. I mean, I think we're seeing that with our customers, where they are looking to use individual pieces of tech, whether it's modernizing their IVR to, going from like directed dialogue to NLU, so incorporating natural language understanding to improve that customer experience and also efficiencies for their contact center. So yes, I think, also all of the cases here, I think are actually really good cases of, starting with the piece parts and exploring and experimenting to deliver new value for their customers. So all of these examples, I think, are decent representations of what you're describing.
And also
And
to
I
add
think
to
it was the previous slide to this slide, if you go back one more.
also just to add to Rich, I think the other part that is also very important is if you're really starting to think about creating these types of solutions, is look around your business and try to find any data opportunity that you can find. Because very often companies think start from scratch, like let's say I'm creating a chatbot using do-it-yourself tools, without realizing that, again, there are parts of the business where they are already having conversations. So maybe your agents are talking to people over the phone, and maybe you have a way to get access to transcriptions of those phone calls. Maybe you have people doing a chatbot or you're doing live chat. So maybe you have a way to get access to those chat transcriptions. So anything that you can leverage already from your business when your customers are interacting with you, that's perfect material to allow you to bootstrap a possible solution that then you can start testing through a different channel and see what lessons come from that.
Perfect. Max, great question. I'm going to just throw out there. Thank you. And it was a little bit on my mind too. So Max is asking, what role do human agents play as organizations make the transition to disrupting using AI or NLP on different channels? A couple just comments here and I'll get to the question. Agents cost more, but it's more of a value to continuing to use agents, question mark. Any case studies where automation increases or decreases CSAT, NPS versus live human assistant? Great question. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I have a thought on that, and Eduardo, feel free to jump in here. But yes, I mean, the human agents still play a very valuable role, and so I think what we're seeing is sort of this trend towards, there's automated self-service, right? That is increasingly, we're all more comfortable with. The more and more we are interacting with devices, and certainly, Alexa-style applications and Google Home and those types of things have increased our comfort level. But when you start to get into those complex kind of edge case scenarios, does my insurance plan cover hip replacement surgery? And what's my deductible? I mean, those kinds of things are complex. They're more personalized, and they, may require kind of that human interaction. And so, definitely, I think, the live agent isn't dead. And but we are finding more and more ways and looking for more creative ways to address sort of self-service opportunities.
I also have, and Eduardo, I'll definitely let you jump in. I have a lot of feeling around this. I believe automation has a place. I believe from our research and findings that and conversations that it will continue to have a place. It's a lot, know your brand, know your customers. I don't think live agent by any means is dead. In fact, a lot of times it's growing for different reasons that are driving it. But I think it's a balance. I think that we've got to look at the things that we're talking about, and we've got to meet the customers in the channel of choice and reduce effort, all that fun stuff. But that's why I'm looking so much forward to the October 22nd New York briefing around all of the things we've been talking about in more of a face-to-face meeting. Eduardo, did you have anything about the live agent piece of it? Just any reaction? I believe there's a space for both, and neither one's going away.
Yeah, no, I guess what I was going to add is that it's very interesting that they were asking about the human aspect, because it's also one of those issues with perception and the reality these days. There wasn't a report, not that, for example, where some reporter actually discovered that what used to be, kind of the ideal example when companies were coming in and saying, oh, I want an experience similar to Google Duplex. I don't know if people had a chance to see that demo of Duplex, which it was a system where the automated system automatically would schedule an appointment for your reservation. And the New York Times reporter actually went in and tried to understand how many times were humans actually involved in those type of transactions. And they realized that it was over 40% of every interaction that happened through Duplex that actually required some human intervention. Whether it was just whenever the system failed and the human actually went in without the user's awareness, or actually a full humanly driven interaction to try to get an appointment done. So it's one of those things where the reality might be a little bit different, and also I think causes issues with companies. AI was the same thing. The people sometimes felt that AI was this magic bullet that I can just plug the machine and automatically know everything and is going to be able to answer all these questions. When the reality is that there's still a lot of work and sweat that has to happen behind the scenes. So humans are still going to play a role in here. They are going to continue to evolve. And actually, the way we see it is these technologies really help to enhance those humans. Internally, we've been talking about almost like this idea of cyborgs in the way of using technology to enhance the capabilities of your existing agents, whether it's giving them faster access to information, it's automatically pulling up recommendations, pulling up predictions, like somebody's reaching out to you. So it's really allowing your humans to do sometimes better work, but instead of just replacing them. That's kind of the trend that we're seeing as well.
So audience, you heard a couple of our thoughts on it. If you have a certain sentiment or feeling about what we just stated, I'd love to have you throw a couple comments to me, agree, disagree, or see it from a different angle about the balance that we've been talking about, and please share your comments. But I want to get into a couple of quick, just techie questions here, and I'll go very, very quick. Some of the tools and technologies, Google speech-to-text capability, I know I'm hearing a lot about moving most of applications to the cloud. Some folks in the community are looking to upgrade some of the technologies. My quick question is, can your technology integrate with Google Cloud, or any other considerations just that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a common question, and the short answer is yes. Our core services, the ones that that most of our customers are looking for today, things like speech to text, natural language understanding, text to speech, all of those common, dialogue and voice biometrics and so forth, are all going to be, using the same cloud native architecture. So we can simplify deployment and integration for clouds like Google Cloud, AWS. We can also, because they're cloud native, they're easily portable for on-premise deployment. So we still have a lot of customers. We have customers, definitely moving to the cloud. It's important. But also we have organizations that have applications on-prem. So we support all those models. And, for cloud-based solutions, there's also that added benefit, of course, that, if you're leveraging our technology in a cloud environment, then you're always getting the latest updates. You don't need to do, upgrade situations. So everything, when it's deployed in the cloud, you're going to have the latest and greatest technology there. So
perfect. I got one more techie question.
Yes.
One quick techie question, and then I'm going to bring it to close here in quick summary. I know I hear in the community that a lot of people are wanting to reuse some of their dialogues across IVR, virtual assistant, or other mobile and web apps. how do you guys approach that, or your thoughts on that, the reuse?
Yeah, I think that's related to the point that made earlier about designing the system once, but then really looking at your specific channel and really trying to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. So this is really with the idea when it comes to omnichannel user journeys, it's very critical. It's being able to identify how are people interacting with me, what are the current pain points, what are the current opportunities, and then figuring out what's the right technology and the right design that I need to apply for that specific aspect. So if you already have some dialogues, like I mentioned, it's a perfect material to bootstrap a system, but then really you have then to look at the lens of the conversational system as well as the specific channel under limitations to figure out how do you deliver a conversational experience for that.
Excellent. Well, our time went very, very fast, and for our friends at Nuance, first of all, thank you for helping the community. Thank you for helping the shared learning and advancing the overall conversations. I hope you'll continue to share your thought leadership and help us and guide us through these navigation waters over the next period of time. Again, designing effortless customer experiences where conversational A and DI met. I think we did a great job today. Thank you for bringing some of the thought processes and ideas around it. For our listeners, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know how busy we all are. The bottom line is I always call it #GetInvolved. You do not need to figure this out alone. There are so many brands, partners, peers that want to share with you their best practices and insights. Get involved. That's my word of advice for everyone, because that opportunity is there for you. So on behalf of myself, Chad McDaniel with Execs in the Know, and all of you, keep customer #1 within your organizations. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for your time. And again, thank you for today's webinar. This will now bring to close.
Thank you for having me.